Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all those tuning in an hour later as we continue our journey and with Captain Jesus' daily word in Genesis 30 today. I can tell you tomorrow and the next day as Jacob is going home, he not only has to overcome one booby trap, but there's at least two before he makes it home to the promised land. But that's tomorrow and the next day. For now, let's get right into it and ask the Lord to bless this session. Father God, thank you for yet another day of your blessing, your guidance, your providence, your protection, your mercy, your love toward us. We ask you, Lord, in Jesus' name, to speak directly to the hearts of those who listen, open the eyes for those to see, and may they be enlightened to hear your word from the Old Testament, written for our example today, as it applies to us today. Now, without further ado, let's get into the reading of Genesis chapter 30 with a little help from our friends.
Saw that she bore Jacob no children. She envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward she bore a daughter, and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything." If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys.
Isn't that great? That was the word of the Lord today from Genesis 30. But there's more. As we learn in our commentary here today, it is just great, the word of the Lord, and how he watches over Jacob as well as Laban, both tricksters. So remember the Beatles song, I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends? Well, this could be easily the chapter title of Genesis 30, as Jake, the trickster, the supplanter, the wrestler, is a busy man in the day. And as we find out, he is even busier at night, fathering at least 11 to 12 children in this chapter. And think about those 12 kids. They became the tribes of Israel. Of course, this was born in the land of Ur the Chaldees, Grandpa Abraham's land. So it's very interesting, the very beginnings of the Jews here. So no wonder there was a famine later, I'd say. They couldn't keep all these mouths fed. As we struggle with 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 kids to make ends meet, join me today in the tale of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Bilhah. Why does that, when I see this name, I think of Coneheads, my wife's favorite movie. Now, verses 1 through 4, Rachel, out of frustration, just like her grandmother Sarah, gives her maid Bilhah to Jacob to bear children through her. Now, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, Give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, cruelly responding, Am I in the place of God to control your private parts and function? Does romantic love or lust grow cold or stale, boys, girls, over the years? Well, you decide. He didn't want to be around 7 minutes or even 14 minutes to hear the rest of this one. So she said, Here is my maid Bilhah, and go into her. She will bear a child on my knees, that I may have children by her. And then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a wife. Although not really a wife, but performed the functions of a wife, this is very dysfunctional, as just like it was with Abraham and Sarah, and so we can see the 3 or 4 wives here, or the 3 or 4 women involved. It's not quite exactly what we would say today as holy. So Jake did go, as the song says, stumbling in, stumbling in, stumbling in. Yep. To bear a child on my knees refers to the ancient practice of the surrogate adoption. It refers to the surrogate sitting on the lap of the adoptive mother during both insemination and birth. So perhaps she was reversed and on the knees, and that's how Jacob entered her. I don't know about you, but it makes me uncomfortable to even think about it. It is likely that Rachel was pretty vain and conceited. She knew that Jacob had worked 14 years with no payout of love for her, and knew that Jacob wouldn't even have worked one day for Leah. But pride hardens the heart, and God has a way of fixing heart conditions, especially emergency operations. Especially despite Rachel's great beauty, she also had despair. And no doubt Leah often said, "If only I had my sister's beauty, then my husband would love me and I'd be happy." No doubt Rachel often said, "If only I had kids like my sister Leah, I'd be happy." Beautiful or plain, we all have our problems, as my friend David Guzik aptly points out. This principle shows us the need to stop looking to how God deals with others and set our eyes upon Him, just as Jesus taught Peter, "What is it to you if this man stays here till I come back?" Right? The tension in this family was apparent, as it was for Abraham, and yet Jacob saw the hand of God in the matter, and he stated it to Rachel so directly as to be cruel about he does not control the fruit of her womb. So, the next kid that's up, Dan, God has judged my case. He has heard my voice and given me a son. So, Jacob's fifth son met judgment. Because of her own envy, she viewed this child, born of the flesh, as a victory, a vindication for her, even though her maid did it for her. Rachel felt that the birth of Dan was proof that God heard her complaint. She felt strengthened in the competition against her sister. Then came Naphtali, verses 7 and 8. And Rachel gave this name, meaning wrestle. That's kind of funny, since Jacob also wrestled. Perhaps later on, these two will bond better. Because the relationships in their home had been broken to the point where Rachel openly acknowledged the baby competition. Leah, let's see the scoreboard. Leah has 4, Rachel substitute as 2, yet she felt she had won. Leah seemed to have stopped having children. Verses 9 through 11 shows the birth of Gad. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Now, 2 can play that game, sis, right? At this point, I imagine Jake is doing his Woody Harrelson dance. Oh, 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 poor women. What have I done to deserve these pleasures? So he has the 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, and now he has Bilhah, and now he has Zilpah. 4. Think about that. And this day, that was, well, I guess that's perhaps what, looking forward, what happened to Solomon. He had a lot. So, but not a good thing. It's hard enough to control 1, right? Leah said, "A troop comes, so good fortune, naming God. Fighting fire in the same way, more avenging, more revenging." The wives continue to use their children as pawns in a power struggle, and this could have been a good NBC sitcom. Leah had apparently lost the peace when her fourth son was born, for she no longer had the peace and praise that Judah had brought. Verses 12 through 13 show the birth of Asher. Now, Asher is Jacob's 8th son, and he means happy. Leah was more concerned, though, about her status the child would bring. "Oh, all the people will bless me," than she was actually for the child himself. So, again, bad motives. Verse 14 through 18, Issachar is born. Reuben, her son, found mandrakes in the field. Now, a root of a mandrake was called a love apple in Hebrew. These were thought to increase fertility in women. Having a sacred weapon, Leah enticed Jacob to sleep with her more. Some use perfume, some use cologne. What do you use, right? Can you believe we are even having this conversation about the biblical patriarchs? "You have taken away my husband." The hostility between Leah and Rachel was obvious, and it was painful. It must have been terrible living in a home where one wife believed the other was stolen from her husband. Can you hear them fight? "Whore! No, you puta!" Yeah, it's just terrible. kind of like New York Sign Language, and it wasn't the right hand of fellowship. This confirms the wisdom of God's original plan as expressed in Genesis 2:24. One man to be joined with one woman in one flesh relationship. Later in Leviticus 18:18, the law forbade the marrying of sisters, and this shows why. Is it any wonder that this family had a history of strife and bloodshed? Children reflect the atmosphere of the home, says the great late Donald Gray Barnhouse. So Issachar, the ninth son, means reward. Leah saw this son as a reward from God for offering her maid. And now comes along Zebulun. Zebulun is Jacob's 10th son, meaning stay with me or dwelling, which is the pain that Leah had in her heart. In the pain of her heart, she still wanted her husband to truly love her and live with her. Verses 21 and 22. Afterward, the ungodly competition had in one sense ended. Leah and the two maids would have no more children from this point on. God's sovereignty, though, over the womb, God then remembered Rachel. God listened to her and opened her womb. Perhaps many years of persistent prayer. God's sovereignty over the womb is repeated in the Bible. So Rachel, like Sarah, finally bears a son for herself, Joseph. I like Joseph because that's my name. And the 11th son means may he add. And at this point, one might think the 11th son would end up being the key son used to further God's redemptive purpose for this family. In a way, Joseph was a typology. But yet, Isaiah 55:8-9 is true. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So Jacob now enters an agreement with Uncle Laban. And two tricksters have an agreement? That's got to be fun. Verses 25 through 27. Jacob knows that it's time to go back home to Canaan. Send me away that I might go to my own place, my country. Though Jacob was in Haran with Laban and his daughters for more than 14 years, actually 20, he knew that he belonged in the land promised to him by God through the covenant made by his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. After 14 years, Jacob called the promised land my country. Now remember, Laban had never been in the promised country. He knew about Abraham, but he never saw him. He knew about Isaac. He never saw him. He only saw his servant, Uncle Eli, as we refer to him, the great Uncle Eli for Jacob. Please stay. If I have found favor in your eyes, and I have learned by the experience of the Lord, has blessed me for your sake. Literally, this means that Laban learned by divination. Now, it is probable that Laban practiced occult divination, witchcraft, and idolatry, which also came out of Abraham's family. So it is not a surprise to me that later the Jews under Moses, while in Egypt, weakened to the same sins. So Jacob negotiates a deal by start by building a flock of sheep and goats for himself. This is where he was already there 14 years, and this is the final 6 years working for a wage that he could leave with. Otherwise, he would leave empty-handed and penniless. The spotted speckled among the goats shall be my wages. Well, Jacob would take the spotted and speckled offspring. At first, he had to separate the currently speckled and spotted ones from the rest of the flock. This set the probability of more speckled and spotted offspring against him. Allowing the speckled and spotted sheep and goats to remain in the flock would increase the likelihood of more speckled and spotted offspring coming from the flock at large. So Laban said, according to your word then, an agreeable deal, foolproof to distinguish who's who between the flocks. Laban liked the deal because the odds were in his favor, but Jacob was willing to trust God on this one. Verses 35 through 36 shows an agreement. Laban separates himself 3 days between Jacob and himself, but not before cheating as much as he can. So Jacob did feed the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob would care for the large flock of his father-in-law Laban, made up of the semi-solid colored animals. But Jacob received any speckled or spotted offspring of this flock. So God blesses Jacob's method of breeding and greatly increases his wealth. Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees. And when Jacob had put these branches in the watering troughs of the flock, it apparently increased the number of speckled and spotted offspring from the solid colored flock that Jacob had managed on Laban's behalf. So God knew something in the dietary that was going to change things in Jacob's favor. So the feebler were Laban's and the stronger were Jacob's. Jacob also uses selective breeding to increase the strength and vitality of his own flock. We don't know exactly how this method worked, but it is possible Jacob knew more about animal husbandry than we do today. It is more likely that Jacob did the best he knew and God blessed it. Genesis 31:10 later shows us that Jacob saw in a dream the blessed reproduction of speckled and spotted sheep and goats. That dream also was connected with the promise of God's care for Jacob and a command to return to Canaan and the land of his family. Thus, the man was exceedingly prosperous. Remember, he came there empty-handed because he was running away from Esau. He had none of Abraham's inheritance. He had none of Isaac's inheritance. He had to run away. And so that was left behind for Rebekah. The ancient Hebrew says, the man burst out exceedingly, exceedingly. God blessed Jacob, but it was not because Jacob was especially good. It was because of the promises God made to Jacob, Genesis 28:13 through 15, and the covenant he made to Abraham. In the same way, the blessing comes from the Lord to us, not because we are great or good, but because of the covenant God has made to us through Jesus and promises he has given us his word, and his word is good. So we may note the principles for Jacob's prosperity. Don't make wealth your goal, Genesis 30:25 and 26. Don't be afraid to work for others and try to increase their wealth before or as you work to increase your own wealth, verse 27. Work hard, dedicating yourself to your employer's success, verse 26, and also the next chapter, 31:38 through 42. And finally, trust God, verses 31 through 33. Well, there you have it. That is today's Genesis 30. We thank you for tuning in. We ask that the Lord bless you and keep you, encourage you, and strengthen you, and give you the peace that passes all understanding this day and the days forward. Now, if the Lord tarries, I'll see you tomorrow for another exciting day in our journey, either now or later. And then again, if I don't see you and the Lord takes us, well, I'll be looking for you on the other side. In the meantime, the Lord bless your day. May he bless you, keep you, and may his face shine upon you. May he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Till next time, God bless you, my friend. Thanks for tuning in. And do hit subscribe, tell a friend, join us every day for the Bible reading. Become a regular member. Subscribe. Thank you.